Hello everybody, how are you guys doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and welcome back. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was actually inspired by the Game Scoop podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts. I'm sure you guys are familiar with them. That is the IGN main sort of overall podcast that they do, hosted by Damon Hatfield for what feels like 97 years at this point, man. It's been going for so long. And I will say that really IGN's podcast, and specifically even Game Scoop, is really kind of the podcast that introduced me to podcasting in general. I mean, we're talking whatever 2009 or 10 or 11, whenever that started. It was a very, very long time ago. I remember because I discovered podcasting just in general for any topic when I was an electrician back in Denver. And that was literally the years like 2008 to 2011 or so. And I discovered them, and they were just so great that was back when Greg Miller was also a part of it, and Damon Hatfield, and even Craig Harris, who also used to do NVC way back. Really good times. And so anyway, I love the Game Scoop podcast. I still listen to it to this day. I am a huge fan of Damon still. I think he does a great job. And while working, I was listening to their most recent episode, and they were answering a user mail question, a fan mail question. And it had to do with kind of defining really the genre of game that helps define the current generation. And also, through that, they had a discussion about previous generations, previous eras of gaming and console gaming and arcade gaming and PC gaming, and the different kind of genres of gaming that have come and gone as sort of the leader of whatever that respective era was, that era of gaming. And it was a really interesting conversation, and it got my brain thinking. I really enjoyed hearing them talk about it, so you should check out the most recent episode if you can, for sure. And what's really interesting to me about their conversation is really kind of what they seem to settle on as far as one of the more defining genres and characteristics of current modern era gaming, which is, essentially 8th gen, 8th/9th if we want to go with the numbered thing, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch. I mean, the Wii U kind of gets itself in and out of there a little bit, and of course PC is this ever-evolving, ubiquitous thing. But when they talk about the modern era, they seem to settle on one genre, and this is mostly, I think Justin Davis was the one who really kind of brought this up, and it was the games as a service model. There was a lot of talk also about the big open world thing and the sandbox kind of game, and that's a conversation I'll get into in a little bit here. But one of the big things that they discussed is maybe the games as a service thing is slowly starting to become the sort of genre-defining, or era-defining genre, I should say, of gaming nowadays. And that got my brain going in a lot of different directions, man. It's like, is that true? Is that not true? Do I agree? Do I disagree? Do I like this? Do I not like this? I don't like that. But do I like this? Do I not like this? All these different things. And I was like, how do I factor in the games as a service into today's modern era gaming? Is that part of what's defining this era of gaming right now? And I gotta tell you guys, I think, yeah, it kind of does. So I know that this is opening up a whole can of worms, but let me just say one thing. Let me put this one sort of caveat onto this whole thing. Personally, I don't love this. I don't like this. I don't like the fact that when I think about everything of modern era gaming, I have to think to myself, yeah, I think that one of the biggest defining genres of this era is the games as a service thing. Why is that so hard to say? The games as a service genre is what's helping define this current era. And I don't love this, because there are some games that fit this description that I very much enjoy, but overall, we're starting to see more and more sort of reasons that expose why this is a problem business model and a problem genre, and something that a lot of gamers aren't enjoying and are wanting to fight back on, and people are picking sides of this way or that on this whole thing, and it's just kind of a messy thing in general. But when you really stop and sort of dissect what's going on with a lot of the biggest releases gaining the biggest ground and the most momentum in the news cycle, it really are these kinds of games, and I think that it's important to note that. I think one of the interesting things to think about when even considering this topic as a whole is what kind of other genres have we seen define previous eras of games, to sort of give us a little context to this whole thing here. Now, when I first think about the idea of a genre of game that really defines an era of gaming or a generation of gaming, the very first thing my brain goes to as an older gamer is the fighting game genre, because I grew up in an era where the fighting game was a huge revolution, and it defined, I think, all video gaming, both home console gaming and at the time arcade gaming. That was the real different split you had, because arcades were very relevant, and at that time in the 90s, in the 8, 16, and even up into the 32 and 64-bit era for a period, at that time, the arcade gaming scene was like the pinnacle of gaming. Nowadays, we understand that's really what PC gaming is. At that time, it was like you got the console scrubs, but then you get the ultimate stuff in the arcades. That's where the best graphics and the coolest ideas and the best, newest games were coming. And everyone wanted to get home console ports of the biggest and best arcade games. That was a big thing that those of us who grew up as 90s kids and 90s gamers, man, that's what was the bee's knees, and we all wanted it and got so excited about it. And at that time, the fighting game scene was the biggest scene. And obviously, the two biggest players in defining this were Street Fighter II and the original Mortal Kombat. And of course, throughout that, many other sequels to those games continued 100 other versions of Street Fighter II, and Mortal Kombat, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, Ultimate Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Mortal Kombat 4, all these different things. And it was, for example, huge revolutions in gaming across the board when Street Fighter II got a port to the Super Nintendo, when the Super Nintendo was brand new. So suddenly, the biggest, hottest arcade game in the history of arcade games, even to this day, Street Fighter II, was suddenly available at home, and it was a pretty darn good port at the time. And then the big thing was Mortal Kombat. Could they ever get Mortal Kombat to come home? And eventually they did, and so I don't need to go into any more of a history lesson here. The point is, at that time, the fighting game scene just started to blow up, and you had so many fighting games, it was insane. Rip-offs of Mortal Kombat, games trying to do what Street Fighter did, games trying to do their own thing. Eventually, fighters became 3D, and we had the Virtua Fighters and the Battle Arena Toshindens and the Tekkens and the Soul Calibers of the world and all this stuff. And for like what was probably 10-ish years, you know, I'm just going off of memory here, that was it. It was the fighting game, man. That one-on-one fighting thing. It was awesome. And that defined, in my opinion, and in my memory, I think no one would really disagree with this, that defined the 8, 16, and a little bit of that 32-bit era of gaming as like the pinnacle, penultimate genre. Now, when we move on to the next era of gaming and the next genre that really started to take over, we get into like that late 32 and 64-bit. We mostly get into the GameCube, PS2, Xbox arena, and a little bit into the 7th gen, the 360, Wii, PS3 era. And throughout that era, I think it's pretty obvious, the number one genre that comes to my mind for that era is the first-person game. That's when the first-person boom started to happen, and whether or not you were multiplayer or single-player, even before the online thing became a big thing for console gaming, it was still all these different new first-person games. How can we make a new game that's first-person? It's so exciting to play a game that's first-person, and everyone wanted to just do that. There are obviously games that predate that era that were first-person. The original Wolfenstein, the original Doom, and Doom 2, of course, PC games. They really kind of created the first-person genre, but it took on a life of its own in the Call of Duty era and in the Halo era. That's when things started to make a huge polar shift. Now, leading out from that, as fighting games kind of started to fade and first-person took over, eventually we also got to what kind of is relevant still today, the open world game and the sandbox game. Of course, that really began with the crazy revolution that was Grand Theft Auto 3, which is a really great game, and I appreciate what that game did. And that became a big thing too, and so we got Grand Theft Auto 4, we get the Red Dead Redemptions, and even the Red Dead Revolvers, a game that people forget about. Zelda started to do more open world things when Twilight Princess came out and things like that, and so many other games. So the last couple of eras, we went from old school was the fighting game, and then we had the first person and the open world sandbox, and then we get into today. And we get into the weirdness that is this current generation, man. This generation is so off the rails bonkers. I mean, it is so hard to define anything about this generation. I mean, we got 8th gen, we got 9th gen, we've got the Wii U, we've got the Switch change in the middle of the generation, we got PS4, Xbox One, no one liked those at first, and then all of a sudden we have mid-gen upgrades of those things. We've got online gaming going to the next level and giving us so many great things, but we also have it being perfect examples of the worst side of gaming and the greediest side of gaming, and then no one knows what's going to happen with the next hardware. Rumors of a PlayStation 5, but the PS4 is so successful, why even do that? I mean, there's 100 things going on with this generation, and I feel like we've all been waiting for so long to understand what really are the big games of this generation. What is defining this generation, both in terms of individual titles and just games that are going to be memorable for this generation for all time, and the genre that is really kind of defining what this generation is about. In 10, 15, 20 years, when we look back on 2013 to 2020, When that, you know, the ancient PS4 and the Xbox and the Switch, when those were the big consoles, what do we remember from those years, you know, 2 decades ago, back in 2016? What was the big thing? And I feel like one of the things is going to be the games as a service model. And so I know it took a long time to get back to this, but I think it was important to revisit some of the previous stuff. And I also like talking about it because it's fun memories for me. But that brings us to the games as a service thing. And what's going on with this generation and the games as a service stuff? You know, a lot. There's a lot going on there. And like I said, because I kind of began this conversation, I don't love that I feel like it's one of the things that really is ultimately the defining characteristic of this generation. Currently, maybe it changes before everything ends and fades away, but I feel like that's kind of what we're looking at. We've got the Destinies, we've got the Shadow of Wars, we've got the Star Wars Battlefronts, we've got the season passes, and we've got the microtransactions and the loot boxes. You know, all these different things, and, you know, even DLC moving into such a common thing where they're trying to force it down our throats. It's all about continuing the online universe and the paid content and the sales after the initial sale. How many more dollars can we get? And the games as a service where they also just want people, and there's something inherently positive about this as well as negative, by the way. They want people to buy games that they believe they can do for an extended amount of time. They want gamers to live on a specific game for a long time. They're less into the one and done games, the adventure, single player, solo, offline campaign sorts of things. There's less and less of that coming from the industry at large. A couple of companies or even consoles are trying to keep some of the single-player stuff alive, so that's great. Nintendo's doing a great job with that. Bethesda's obviously doing a great job with that. And that's great. Some companies blur the lines, you know, like Rockstar, for example, with the GTA stuff, and probably with Red Dead coming out soon. They do a great job of incorporating both, and that works. But for the most part, this games as a service model is becoming a bigger thing. And we're really not seeing signs of it slowing down. You know, we wanted to believe that the Battlefront 2 fiasco was going to be the boiling point, and the industry was going to realize, whoa, we have to get hands off with this thing. We have to change our plans. We can't do this in the future. But we're not really seeing that. I feel like over the next couple of years, man, for all of these consoles, we're going to continue to see games like this created, and games that should be created without the idea of the games as a service, ever-present online thing as a part of it, will instead incorporate those things. And it's a shame, but there are instances where it's a good thing too, like I kind of alluded to earlier. I mean, for myself, the best and most relevant example is Monster Hunter World. I cannot stop playing that freaking game. That is, as I said on Twitter recently, that is the game that has sucked up the most amount of my time since Breath of the Wild last year. And Breath of the Wild was the first game to do it in a very long time. I even had discussed how before Zelda, I kind of went through this rut where I really wasn't into playing games for more than like an hour at a time. And I kept buying these games and loving these games, but I just couldn't play for more than an hour before I'd get bored and have to do something else. Breath of the Wild changed that and sucked me back in like nobody's business. But then that was done, and it took all the way until Monster Hunter World. And Monster Hunter World kind of does the games as a service thing. It wants to be a living, breathing, ever-present online thing that asks me to always keep playing it and never giving me new stuff to do, never stop giving me new stuff to do, never stop giving me new content. I can always get online and play with people and talk to people and get with my buddies or meet random strangers and go do hunts, and it wants to keep me online playing this game for a long time. It doesn't want to do what Uncharted does. It doesn't want to do what Super Mario Odyssey does. It wants to keep you there for as long as possible, and eventually they're going to start releasing paid stuff and asking me to buy more things. And, you know, that's the nature of the beast with where we are right now, but I think it's what we really can take away from this generation so far. And, you know, there's another negative here, and I'll kind of wrap this up with this. There's another problem I see happening with this games as a service thing, and this might have less to do with the service part, but it is a problem with how the online infrastructure of gaming now, I think, is negatively impacting games. I'm kind of sick of every game now starting to have a hub. Every game's like menu system for any game you start nowadays more and more often is all about the hub, the online hub, the other player's hub, the whatever. And to me, the moment I realized it was too much and I'm getting sick of it was Dragon Ball FighterZ. A great game that I love, but that game is a fighting game. It's a one-on-one fighting game. And they still structured that game around the idea that when you start that game and you get to the title screen, you press start, it starts to just connect you to servers, and it's finding servers, and you're getting menus, and you're getting loading bars, connecting to this, rerouting to this, doing this, checking this server, doing that, and then you're put into this big hub where you have an avatar, and if you want to select one-on-one fight, local fight, online fight, story mode, arcade mode, you have to walk around a map with avatars of other players to find your thing that they designed like a Dragon Ball thing. And the newest Call of Duty did that, Destiny does that, Splatoon does that, and it's driving me insane. The occasional game can get away with it. I like how Destiny does it, but Destiny operates in an MMO kind of fashion. Games like Splatoon, I don't think need to do this. Games like Dragon Ball FighterZ don't need to do this. Just give me a title screen menu and I'll select from a list of options what I want. This walking around because I have to be connected to an online server with a bunch of people everywhere and avatars of who this player is and that player. So I see this person has a crazy avatar that's so rare. Where can I buy that avatar? Where's the online store section I need to walk to on this map? And it's like, for the occasional game that demands this, like a Destiny for example, it's fine. It's not like I hate it outright, but I hate that this sort of kind of model, this always connected online model, for the sake of trying to get extra money out of you down the road, I'm sick of it existing in games where it doesn't belong. And like I said, Dragon Ball FighterZ, it's not the only example, but it's the most recent one, and it's the one that tipped me over the edge. And I feel like it is kind of a result of the games as a service model becoming bigger and bigger and more important to this current era of gaming. So that's another thing that I don't like about it. That being said, I feel like I tangented all over the place in this video, so I'm hoping it was still entertaining and you guys got something from this conversation. But at the end of the day, I think that that's one of the things we're seeing with today's gaming and what really is defining what I think the industry at large is doing and pushing. There is the sandbox thing. I think the big open world sandbox game is obviously still very huge and relevant. There's some spillover from the last generation. First-person games, yeah, they're still big, they're still relevant. We're going to get another Halo. Call of Duty still exists. Destiny is a big game, sure. But they don't own the industry the way it did way back in the day. And obviously fighting games, those are, I mean, they still exist, but they are nothing like what they were in their heyday. To me, it's the games as a service, and it's also kind of the sandbox thing. And you know, love it or hate it, that's where I personally think we are. And you know my feelings on it, actually very strong. There's some of it that I like, but there's a lot of it that I don't, and it makes me curious about the future. So I definitely want to hear, as always, what you guys have to say. What do you think defines this current era of gaming? Do you think it's game as a service? Do you think it's not games as a service or something else? Do you like this idea? Do you dislike this idea? Maybe you're more interested in one of the many other tangents I had in this video that isn't even about that exact topic, because like I said, I touched on a lot of different ideas here, but you know what? I had a lot to say, man. I really had a lot to say with this, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. This is the kind of stuff I like to do. So tell me what you think about this idea. How do you think about current era gaming, and what do you take away from it? That is going to be it for me for now. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.